to this very special event that we're having today. We're going to be talking about restored language and restored culture and the healing that can come from that, and the ongoing work. Okay, Halay, did I just say it wrong?
Sounds good. That sounds good. Halay.
Halay Turning Heart is here from the Yuchi Nation, so live from Oklahoma, what we call Oklahoma, the occupied territory by the United States, but it is Yuchi Nation. She'll be I think you maybe be alluding to that a little bit, the relocation, and but the Yuchi peoples were relocated, so they were actually from the East Coast here and moved west, as many of our Indigenous nations were. And so we want to remember that. And I think as we're coming in, it is probably important to acknowledge the fact that if you are here in Pennsylvania, in New Jersey, in this area here near Philadelphia, then we are on Lenni Lenape lands and we are occupying those. So let us always give honor to them, and let us always recognize the colonial systems, the racist systems that exist, the systems that have either brought us here by force or through immigration to occupy these lands, and join with them to be always speaking out against and acting against those colonial systems so that we might bring healing to this land. Yeah. And so I'm going to introduce Halay. So she is, okay, the project director, right, for the Yuchi language project. And you have actually been working on this project, even though I think the school itself is a couple years old officially, but this is since the 90s.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and your dad is the executive director and kind of the creator behind the project, but you quickly joined him, I have no doubt.
Yes, I was recruited at an early age.
And your son is here with you, right?
That's right, Cheske, he's here to help me out.
So we're going to have an opening prayer, and you have graciously offered to bring prayer for us in your mother tongue, your heart language. And okay, Cheske is going to help. Please forgive me. All right. So we will have our opening prayer.
We really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. And I invited my son to share in our language and open with prayer. And just to give you some background, Cheske is just turned 6, and he's a first language speaker of our Yuchi language, and he's the first speaker in 70 years. So we haven't had children speaking our language for 70 years, but now my kids are being raised in the language and are the first of their generation. So Keri Saint Ontlenchi,
Nande contedeina de huside nande contedeina de huside na kahase ofa yawe yawe akeve la asufa.
Oh, go ahead to neabe gatalene ha wayoshi le nande go chatla go wedene ha da he en nonka amfe nonde you shan le kene ha go ahead to ne nonka ju da he en nonka amfe nande Ototo ina ohahani ina isala o yoshi le asoti gaflana iha. Abe nenzeti e yup anon kwan ke nompe. Ista e danta weofla ke no fina jempala. Shushu tosho gaju o yoguate.
Shushu tosho gaju nana gastuka au shushu tosho gaju gastuka au ha agave higave ju tosho no o guai. Shukawangwa Faye. Shushu Wena Owa Wakanga we get sent. Shushu yo any Waking we get sent. Uchi koi pate we senji. Usale the gia pochanta the yatiti tisu be wiswichi wa kungwani.
Hao san le kia sota. Ya on quan. Shin shen le. Jesus di hon ze tia you. Ga so a chi hi zo ga. Hon to to he na hon di. Na hon da ba hon di hon da ba. Jesus di hon ze tia you. Jesus di hon ze tia you. Jesus di hon ze tia you. Aso achi hizo gua. Akele. That concludes our opening Sanlake Asuta.
Wonderful, thank you. And for those who are just coming in, we're gonna begin the presentation now, I think. All right.
Great. Should I share my slides?
Wonderful, that would be great.
Oh, Sanlake Asuta. I wanted to share some images and some audio as well from our community here in Oklahoma. And our language is called Yuchi. You see it spelled there at the top. The Yuchi Language Project has been in operation now over 25 years. So I grew up in the program and had the opportunity to learn the language from our elders, who are mostly in their 80s and 90s. So as they're passing on now, my role is to carry on what I've learned to our kids and my own family, but also other kids in our community. So this is a drawing of me and my 2 older kids, and then I have a baby who's 1 now. So I have 3 little ones, and I've only spoken to them in our Yuchi language since they were in the womb. So they're first language speakers. I'm raising them entirely in our language, which is a real challenge because I'm more of a second language speaker. So I was raised with some Yuchi, but mostly in English. So this is a big undertaking. But I knew before they were born that this was an important role for me to play in bringing back our language, is to create new first language speakers among our children. So I included this at the top is actually Hawaiian language. And I think it's a beautiful proverb. Ika olelo no ke ola, ika olelo no kamake. In language, there is life. In language, there is death. And we look at this in terms of our history and also our future, that we believe the language is the key to maintaining our identity, our culture, our history, our worldview, our medicinal knowledge. And really, our language is a gift from Gohantune, from God, from the Creator, from our giver of life. Gohantune, Yuji ha go'wedene we non zo wanje. Our elders tell us that Gohantune gave us our Yuchi language, and it's up to us to carry it on. So some statistics here that are of interest. There were once more than 300 indigenous languages spoken in what became the United States. And today, about 150 are still spoken. So even half are already lost. And of those, only, or the majority, have only elderly speakers, meaning children are no longer speaking those languages. So we know that that's, we're in a very dire situation across the nation and in each community. Without babies learning the language, we're just one generation from losing our languages. So this is part of my work, and a little bit of our history. our Yuchi people were originally in the southeast, like what became Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, even later into Florida and up into the Carolinas. But our people were forced to Oklahoma, what is commonly known as the Trail of Tears, which we don't use that really in our own language, but we just call it like being force marched here. Really, it was a death march. So a huge proportion of our people perished on this journey. And it's been a huge impact on our language, on our way of life. And I put up in the notes that we were actually living there in the southeast when DeSoto came through in 1540 and continued all those years with a strong, successful society. But we were hit very hard by disease and by warfare, as well as all of these colonial attacks and assimilation. So we see even today in Oklahoma, there's English only laws, and these English only laws say that, you know, English is the only official language, and that any other language is not, it's not really allowed. It's not allowed in the schools. They won't provide any resources in any other language. So we find that it's very damaging to our youth who are learning our language and then are often punished when they go to a public school because they think Yuchi will hold them back. But we actually find the opposite to be true. Students who are bilingual are actually outperforming monolingual students. So there's a lot of misinformation and ignorance around that. I wanted to share this audio when we're looking at that history. We have a song, a hymn that we call Yuchi hymn number 1, Halay Agana, Halay Omfene. And this song was sung on the Trail of Tears. And it was a song of encouragement to people, say they're way behind you or way in front of you. You could hear them singing this song and you would know that they were there supporting you as well as they could. So we'll listen to this a little bit, and the lyrics are here. You can read along. Halay Agana, everyone come. Halay Omfene, we all go together.
Halay Agana, Halay Omfene, Halay Agana, Halay Omfene, Sanachine Ayo, Neya Halay San Ayana, Halay Agana, Halay Omfene.
Samlela. So this is a very powerful song that we carry on today, and we teach our children and youth as well. And it's this message of always going forward. We don't go back. And in our language work, we
Halay
in our language work, we have that perspective. You know, we're not always looking 500 years in the past, we're looking 500 years in the future. And how can we make our languages sustainable into the future? This is a little bit of a more history, as I'm sure you've heard of the boarding school era and this process of taking children out of their homes and putting them in boarding schools. And a huge function of that was to break the natural transmission of language, of Indigenous language in the home, and replace that with an English only environment, and many of our elders were actually punished for speaking their native language and were forced to only speak English. And this was a key way that our language was broken down. And so my great grandmother went to Yuchi mission boarding school, and she was 14 when she went, so she didn't completely forget her language, her Yuchi language, but she was so traumatized that she wouldn't speak to her own kids in Yuchi. She only spoke to them in English because she didn't want them to go through these horrors that she saw in the boarding school. And so in our family, you know, my father, Dr. Richard Grounds, who started our program, he was the first one to start reclaiming our language in our family. And now his grandkids are first language speakers. So we're restoring that natural transmission that was broken with my great grandmother's generation. And now, you know, the hope is that my children will raise their children in their Yuchi language as well. So it's really a story of hope and resilience. This is a little video clip of some of our kids in the program. We put their, what they call Indigenous Peoples Day, but it's also just a nice video, and what they're saying in the background is actually a prayer, and the prayer is saying, today I am speaking Yuchi. I'm here as Yuchi. I am speaking Yuchi. God is standing near to us and helping us carry on our language. You know, bless our mothers, our fathers. Bless our house. And I'll play it here. You can listen. I think it's just 1 minute. Oh, so you see some of the text there is bilingual, but one of them says decolonize your mind. And we realize that by reclaiming our language, we're decolonizing our minds, that our languages really are the framework for our worldview. And reclaiming our Yuchi language is reclaiming our original worldview, our connection to our oral history, our ancestors, and keeping that alive for the future. And there's a few other text pieces there that said something like, be a language healer. And we do feel that our work is about community healing, and our work is about carrying on the gifts that God has given us and healing our minds, healing our children, as well as our community from this trauma that we've experienced. And really through our language is the key to restoring that. And so in this sense, our work is very much a ministry. It's a nonprofit. Our program is an independent nonprofit. But we do have partnerships with churches as well in our area. So this slide is just a little background on our Yuchi language as kind of an example, which they call it a Yuchi, a language isolate. Isolate meaning it's unrelated to any other language. So most languages are part of a family, a language family, and some are quite huge. But Yuchi is actually its own language family. So this is a very unique language, and there are several things in our language that are very unique, and I listed some here, which we could spend all day talking, explaining. But for example, we have pronouns that refer to Yuchi people and non-Yuchi people, which means anytime you're talking about someone, it's in the grammar, you know whether they're Yuchi or they're non-Yuchi. And our non-Yuchi category includes all other tribes. So say someone is Cherokee, Lakota, Chickasaw, any other native, as well as white, black, any other race, as well as all of the living creatures, which we would say in English are animals. In Yuchi, we really don't have that word for animals, but they're the non-Yuchi living people, the other persons there. And the sun, the moon, the stars are all in this grammatical category. So it's a really different worldview that I think really shapes the way we relate to one another, as well as how we take care of the earth, our natural environment, our relatives, and all living creatures. So that's one of the interesting things. And then this slide, infusing love into our work. So we've seen the horrors, the tragedy, and the, the colonialism, the ongoing assimilation. But really to move forward, we believe that love, infusing love into our work is the answer. And that replacing all of that with love for one another, for our people, for Gohantune, our creator, and our language, we have a bright future. And so this slide, it's talking in Yuchi about when you wake up in the morning, greeting your children in your language. Hanip aji le yuji hale nezidi gantwedeje. Agat e yuji hale zenik gantwedete hido ondaje. And before bed, praying with your children in your own language and the power of that, and that they would dream in your own language. So these are the kind of things that I help encourage our young parents. So beyond my family, there are 8 children being raised in the language that I help mentor their parents. And I try to help them learn language they can help use in the home and raise their own children in the language, as well as in our classes. So this is some practical information about how does language revitalization work. And we see that it's you have to be very intentional. And there are some methods that work and that are working. For example, immersion means only speaking your language, not translating through English or another colonial language. But during our classes, it's all Yuchi. And even if you don't know any Yuchi starting out, we use pictures, we use props and acting out and context so that you can understand what's going on. So it'd be like traveling, say you travel to Mexico and you're suddenly immersed in Spanish. It's like its own community. And that's part of what we try to create, is a living habitat for our language, a living language habitat, we call it, where our kids can grow up hearing our language as a first language. Master apprentice is when a learner like myself is with an elder or a fluent speaker, kind of living in the language, but also having classes around practical topics. And you might have heard of a language nest, which is an intergenerational learning environment, which is also immersive. So you'd have children, adults, maybe grandparents who are creating that home in the language. This slide again is about the healing aspect of our work. We feel like our language work is really about health. It's about well-being. It's about reconnecting to the land, to one another, returning to our traditional foods, our diet and lifestyle, reimagining the possibilities for our future. And this is a picture of our Yuchi church, which is called Pickett Chapel United Methodist Church. And there's a banner up in the left, Yuchis of Pickett Chapel, always forward, never go back. And that's kind of the motto of our Yuchi church. And this whole area is like allotment land that my great grandmother I spoke of earlier, her name was Pickett, Ella Pickett. So this is her family that started the church and is still carrying on. And there used to be sermons in Yuchi and in Creek language, and then later in English. So we're trying to bring back the language there. There are still hymns sung in our language. Most of the preaching is in English now. But our elder on the right is recently passed away. She was 96, but she was a first language speaker and used to teach Sunday school in Yuchi to our kids. So this is my daughter with her. She would tell Bible stories, just translating them as she read into Yuchi, as well as teaching them songs and scriptures in the language. So that was one of the ways. This little video is her life story. It's her talking, and it's about her reclaiming her language because she went to boarding school and had kind of lost her language, and then through a spiritual journey actually reclaimed her language and talking about what it meant to her. And one of our students illustrated the phrases. So this will be it's in Yuchi, but you can follow the story kind of by these drawings.
Henry saw his egg in the on one look at the Lene Heart. I had a lot get into that sanction they had way down in the where in the way now where they got that. I had e collar when I was going Nebraska here no fake. I had where and they were hauling at the way hot. I had the got that. And they away for when gone to a holic at the lay and hockey and hockey. Sanctionate all your hey go wait and they aren't way they are you under attack. And they go away now we dig our dollar the way now sanctionate week on all these engine. And they his spawning highway now. Way they his Saint Legend, do touch all dark wish digi and the ghost way now they still okay and he lay with sanctionary wake way they and has carry we have and neck a lot a lay go gone away now neck a lot he's on a heart go away now sanctionary wake on those all these engine neck and and I had they cheated.
So we won't take time. This is a long story, but overall, this part of the story is she was at a large meeting, church meeting, and they asked everyone to pray in your own language. And so she heard all these different communities praying strong in their own language, but she couldn't pray in her own language, in Yuchi. And this moment is what spurred her to reclaim and revitalize her language. And she wanted to make sure that all the kids in our community could also pray in their language. So she was an adult when she reclaimed her language and then continued to teach many decades, recently passing at age 96. So it was a very spiritual journey that she talks about praying for her language, that she would be able to speak, and also putting in a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of time, and relearning from other speakers who were living at that time. This is a picture of my great grandma on the right, and then my grandpa. As I mentioned, she went to boarding school and was a first language speaker, but didn't speak to her son after that. And this is a little bit about my background, just to give some context. My mother, who's non-native, is now a retired United Methodist pastor. She was serving churches in Minnesota and then recently in Oklahoma, and then retired just 2 years ago. And then my father is also very involved in the United Methodist Church, not as clergy, but as a lay person, and working with the World Council of Churches, as well as our local church, the Pickett Chapel. And so I grew up in this interesting dynamic where I was raised in the church as well as with our elders, and learning the language in Master Apprentice and learning the old stories. And these are some of the elders that I worked with over the years who are now passed away. And then as I got older, I wanted to go to college. And that's where I met my husband, who is pictured here, Giles, and he's Lakota. He grew up on Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. And so we happened to meet in college at Dartmouth and have 3 little ones. My son you met, who's 6, just turned 6, and then our daughter's 4, and then a 1-year-old. And this is a picture, a drawing of our eldest living speaker, who's in his early 70s, and now his great grandson is learning the language. So this is another example of restoring the language in our community. After 25 years of our program, we were so many years creating second language speakers, and now finally are able to start younger and younger down to babies. So these are some images of the program and the activities over the years. We do find we're currently looking for a land base. So our Yuchi people, as I mentioned, are displaced, as well as don't have separate federal recognition aside from the Muskogee Creek Nation. So this means our people don't really have any land. And we feel strongly that to revitalize our language, we need a land base. And that would really, the land is the basis of our curriculum. So we go through the seasons and the traditional activities for every season as the basis of our language learning. So we're out digging wild onions in the spring, and then gathering medicines in the summer, and harvesting. We do gardening and agriculture as well. These are just some pictures of over the years, our work trying to raise awareness, get the word out, not only about Yuchi, but for Indigenous language revitalization in general. And my father's led this work and is also the chair of the Global Indigenous Languages. So he's been going to the United Nations now for almost 20 years to raise awareness about the need for support for community-based language work, not just academic, not just documentation, but actually creating new speakers, which is what we feel is the most important. So our vision is creating and sustaining multiple generations of fluent speakers so that the beautiful Yuchi language can live again in the homes and cultural activities of the community. So we're at a pivotal point now with these new ones learning Yuchi as a first language, but now how do we support them moving forward? So I'll talk a little bit about that. A lot of people sometimes wonder if learning Yuchi holds them back from learning English. Also, is it detrimental in an academic sense? There is a lot of misinformation there. So this is just a list we've compiled from different research around bilingualism, multilingualism, but also examples from Indigenous language programs that see higher graduation rates, higher test scores, and improved academics among Indigenous language learners versus just English only. And then as we know, and as we've seen in our own community, greater confidence, greater self-esteem, a sense of identity, a sense of connection to their people, their community, a lot of specialized local knowledge that's at risk of being lost, whole ecosystems and the worldview in our language, which is almost lost, we believe is the answer to, the extractive industries and capitalism and all of these things that are ruining our environment. On the bottom, there's a nice quote from the Pegan Institute, which is a Blackfeet language. They have seen that speakers are the happiest and most centered in the community. And so I think that's a really good response when we think about why do we even do this work? It's so hard, why? In the end, it's because it makes us who we are. It makes us happy. It brings joy. And it's such beautiful work. The language is so beautiful. And that's why I wake up every day and speak to my kids in my own language. So this work is definitely a marathon. It's something that takes many, many years. But with the right methodology, we're seeing a lot of results. This is a sign outside of our program that's Gakale Hile'e. And this is where we have a boundary, English outside, Yuchi inside. This was an article that came out during the pandemic. As you may know, the pandemic was very hard on our Indigenous communities and on our elders. So many language speakers passed away during COVID. And this is our elder, Maxine Golahaboshita, who actually had COVID but survived it. This is a little diagram I put together about what does it take, to save a language, quote unquote. What we've seen is you need sustained funding over time. You need an immersion language habitat, which we're creating for Yuchi only school and our classes. as well as consistent leadership. And then adding in the land base so that you have that connection to the old world view. And addressing a need for a healthy diet and health, physical health, as well as wellness. What we've, at the bottom, you'll see we've done Master Apprentice, our immersion school, and our language nest are creating new speakers. So this is another little clip, an example of our kids as first language playing in the language, playing in Yuchi.
Đi ta có đi đâu cái đi thả.
Oh, we got kitten shash to hot.
So hot we do back, we do back. Nonny, we do be. We do be. Nonny, we chi hả. Nonny, we do chi. Wait. I'll see it.
Pesha ale nata.
Okay, I do so.
Kittens love. Pesha act up. Pesha act up.
Ở phía ha, ta tốt đi, tôi có đi cha này giờ. Ta tốt đi, tôi có đi cha nè.
We got kittens love. So I think in the interest of time, I'm not sure we want to save time for questions. I'll skip ahead a little bit here. This is a picture of our, as was mentioned, in 2018, we launched the immersion preschool with 12 students to be educated fully in the Yuchi language. And so to advance that, we have to add a grade level each year. And so this coming fall will be first grade. And this will enable the students to continue advancing without having to go to public school and learning English and losing their Yuchi language. So this is the main thrust of our work currently, is to keep that going and enable the children to keep learning. This is a nice quote, Wilma Mankiller: whoever controls the education of our children controls our future. And so this is why we realize our community has to educate our own children in our own language. This is a little diagram about how we're approaching this decolonization and indigenizing, Yuchifying, as we say, our approach, which affects all things. You know, what holidays are we celebrating? What are we eating? What is our testing, our literacy approach? Our language is originally oral, so it was not a written language. Our clothing, we try to wear our Yuchi traditional clothing, and so on. And this is a nice poem by Jeanette Armstrong, not Yuchi, but she's Okanagan, and talking about reclaiming this connection to the language and the land. I don't think I'll take time. This quote, her book is called Land Speaking, and the language spoken by the land, which is interpreted by the Okanagan into words, carries parts of its ongoing reality. The land as language surrounds us completely, just like the physical reality of it surrounds us. Within that vast speaking, both externally and internally, we as human beings are an inextricable part, though a minute part of the language of the land language. This is a little clip of one of the mothers. We did this for International Mother Language Day. which is a clip of her singing to her son in the womb in Yuchi. This is a little example of our classes. During the pandemic, we've been mostly on Zoom, and
So
Yeah,
wait,
man.
shoo, we got it, man.
Shoo, shoo, shoo. We got that now.
Oh, this is your translation. Lily?
Now, Halay, we got that now.
Eso, so Johnny, we did that.
Cosa contani, wait it now. Sadly. And they let you let in. We got now.
Yung Toto.
Young Toto, wait it now. Young Toto. Go.
so they have a lot of fun. And that long word, Sanley, it means that's good, Sanley. So they learned that word real quick, Sanley. And then I included a few slides about the UN, United Nations Decade on Indigenous Languages, which is something that our program has been part of promoting. Even as I was saying, my father going to the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and first lobbying for the International Year of Indigenous Languages, which took place in 2019 and now has been parlayed into the decade. And so part of this for us is connecting with other language programs around the world. We helped to co-host a launch event focused on grassroots programs around the world. And this was held January 5th and 6th in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And then we've had a lot of opportunities to do community outreach. A lot of our efforts are around changing the narrative around being a language speaker. So the old narrative was, if you speak Yuchi, then you're dumb, you're inferior, you're disadvantaged. And so here we have a drawing we did of Yuchi Einstein, which is a message saying, if you speak Yuchi, you're really smart. You're super smart, even smarter than Einstein. And we gave the kids certificates and medals and had a little quiz show to show off their learning, raising the prestige and building pride in themselves. So this is part of our work. So as to wrap up, when we talk about these issues, a lot of people say, well, what can I do? What is my role? And how can I contribute? So we put together a little list of ideas, and there are things that partners can do to contribute, becoming more involved in this issue, adopting a language, helping to raise funds, becoming a language advocate, sharing about this with your social groups, whether you're online or in social media or just in your own family. And if you live near a language program, even volunteering your time or your services, especially things like grant writing and those kind of things can be a big help to reduce the burden on those of us who are running classes. And there's often political campaigns to raise awareness, as well as donating. And on our website, we're just now launching a capital campaign because we need to buy, as I was mentioning, a land base as well as have an established school where the students can continue learning, because all these years we've been renting. A lot of our grants were completely grant funded and they wouldn't allow property purchase. So this is our big thrust moving forward. And this is just another picture of our group. And the website, yuchilanguage.org at the bottom, and then my email, info@yuchilanguage.org.
Hi, Halay. My name's Barbara, and my traditional land is Nebraska. So some of this herstory I know, but I'm intrigued by your mother. Does she speak Yuchi? And a second question is, I also was at Wounded Knee in '73, and my college experience led me to Wounded Knee. So I still have Lakota friends that I keep in contact with. And
Yes.
I'm wondering if your children are, I guess they would be trilingual. Do they speak Yuchi, Lakota, and English?
Yes, those are great questions. Yes, my husband, he's not fluent in Lakota, but he uses a lot of the language. So they are trilingual and also learning a little Spanish. So we're going for multilingual. And so they call me Ina, and they call him Ate, which is Lakota for mother and father. And that's how we're referred to usually at home. But yeah, it's really nice, the partnership. So my husband supports me by learning Yuchi as well as speaking Lakota. We mainly try to minimize English in the home. But any other language we support. And then my mom is also learning Yuchi. She's, I would say, very beginner level, but she's very supportive and attends our classes in order to learn language that she can use with her grandkids, who are strong Yuchi speakers. And so that support is so important. But she's mainly an English speaker, and I don't remember, were there other parts to your question, or did I miss something there?
I think you got it all.
Thank you. Yes. Good question.
My name's Sherry. I have a question about why. So you said when you were receiving grants, you weren't allowed to purchase land, but now you want to purchase land. So what's up with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, our funding comes from different sources. For example, right now we have what they call Administration for Native Americans federal grant, like a 3-year grant. And part of their guidelines is it can only be for operational funds. They don't allow you to invest in land or property. So a lot of the grants do have those stipulations. But we're now lobbying for unrestricted funds that would allow us to, use the money as needed for the needs of the program, which right now are to invest in property and land base. So it's very, it is a struggle. And I don't know the ins and outs on their end, but most funders will only fund programming, not property or real property, they call it, those kind of investments. So we've been kind of stuck in that cycle. We are still applying for those grants, but with the hope of freeing up our flexible funding in order to put that toward the property as much as we can. So we welcome all funds in terms of operational, property purchase, even we were looking in our area, if anyone wants to donate land, that could be a really nice possibility. So we're just praying, we're praying for a breakthrough, but it's kind of up in the air right now. So our hope would be to, by the fall, be open with our new location would be our hope. So.
Thank you.
So this is property for the school for the project, not for the nation. It would be held by the nonprofit.
Right, right. Because there's no land base even for other Yuchi activities. There's no even a community center. Mainly our program has been the main Yuchi location, which is focused on language, but it incorporates all other activities, and we do community events and that kind of thing as well. But it's the main place that Yuchis gather on a daily basis. So we we see the need for that land base in order to have a permanent location, not be unsure year to year, will we even have our doors open? That's what's so hard about the roller coaster of grant funding up and down every year, and being able to maintain staff as well as having, security for the families who are wanting to educate their kids in the language. So
this is something we could contribute as individuals, or if our church wanted to get something and send something. Okay. Other questions, anyone? Oh, Reverend David Brown, go ahead.
I'm wondering, you mentioned early on that there are laws prohibiting the use and perhaps teaching of languages other than English. So to what extent is your project needing to get exceptions and even civil disobedience? I don't know, but it sounds like a major barrier to what you're doing.
yes, that's a great question. So as a independent nonprofit, we're able to operate, and it's not a legal issue. However, socially, it's a big negative perspective when it's mandated. English only is mandated in this area, so that our families, our children, as well as the school teachers and community members are only valuing English and feel like any other language is a barrier, it's a negative. So we're able to legally operate. However, it's not as supportive as we would like. And then we kind of operate as an independent school, not affiliated with any public school system. I guess it would be similar to a charter school or almost like a homeschool, but it's a group thing. So Oklahoma is pretty flexible in those terms, which is helpful to us. But it is, it's not a good sign when the government's saying English only, nothing else is a path to success and being valued in your own area. So it's definitely a weird and kind of a weird situation here. Deborah?
I have a question. This is amazing. This is a wonderful project. And I think you mentioned it somewhat at the beginning, but as someone who absolutely loves languages, when it all started, because it went down to like 1 or 2 people who were speaking. So do you have a grammar, or is it oral, or was it a process? Can you say more about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So our program has been breath to breath all the way. Even 25 years ago, there were a lot more speakers. So starting then, they were involved in the program and teaching learners. But all the way up until now, there have been first language fluent elders as the main source of the language. we don't have a lot of written resources. So we don't have a dictionary and those kind of things. So my father developed an orthography, a writing system about 15 years ago or so that we use now. And we create our own books and our own materials, but it's a huge undertaking that it'll be a lifelong project to keep up with. We want things for the kids to be able to read, to also be literate in Yuchi and all of those resources. So we create our own. There's a few old historical things that were written by linguists that we do draw upon. Some of those are hard to decode. Their orthography was either inconsistent or kind of archaic. So we do draw on what we can. But being an isolate, it's so challenging. You don't have any related languages to borrow words. You're completely on your own. So we don't really borrow words from English much, but we're able to describe things in the Yuchi worldview in Yuchi, if that makes sense. So like, for example, computer, our elders came up with a word, tosanda, which means electronic brain, or it could mean lightning brain. And so they're able to describe it. It sounds good in our language, but it's a good way of interacting with all of this technology and the new things. But we do find we're strongest when we're doing our traditional activities in the language, a lot of agriculture and those kind of things. So we're happy to keep those going.
Thank you so much.
That's awesome. I remember your dad came and spoke to the students at Drew that were in a class, and he took them aback a bit. They weren't sure what to make of the fact that he said, I would rather the language die out than it end up burned on a CD or in a book on a shelf somewhere. It needs to be alive. And so I hear a lot of that in what you're saying.
Yeah, that's right. For us, we do document and we do archive, but it's just a support for the breath to breath learning and mostly intended for our community members so that they have resources, as our elders pass, that they can still connect to the first language speaking. The rhythm for us is very important, and the sounds, and a lot of those things are so different in our own language that you have to hear it, and just writing it is not, you can't really learn it just from writing. Hearing and practicing and interacting is the key for us, and keeping it alive, as you said, is the goal. So.
And I was going to say too, I read when I was looking at the decade of Indigenous languages, and I also read that the National Archives of the United States are providing grants for researchers to go into Indigenous communities. But again, it sounds like it would be the same kind of projects as what your dad was describing, which is not helpful. And you have a very unique, I think, format here that's really important. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's so much funding for academic, kind of dissecting the language or those kind of things that are not really keeping it alive in the community. And then it is frustrating as a community program. We are, on a shoestring without any access to that level of funding. So that's one of the pushes for the decade now, is to have 50-50, they call it a 50-50 protocol. Say $1 million is going to academic study of Indigenous languages, then $1 million needs to also go to grassroots community-based language revitalization, which has not been the case. So we're really getting just a small percentage of the funding put out there. There's also a push to rematriate. They call it native language rematriation, where all of the old linguists archives that are not even accessible to community people, that those would be returned to communities for language revitalization efforts. So that's another push in a lot of communities, that maybe people from museums went and did recordings and then took them away and are now housed in some museum that no one, unless you have a PhD, no one can access, even if it's your family. And so this is one of the social justice issues and one part of our work as well, to raise awareness there, as hopefully part of this UN decade. So there's a push to have a convention on Indigenous languages, and that would be at the UN level to try to get some help there.
I have a question. First of all, hi friend, and I'm really glad.
I'm glad you're here, Carell.
Yeah, I really love, seeing the wonderful, beautiful work that you're doing. And, our community is also working on language revitalization with very few resources.
Oh yeah.
But I do have sort of a question that you may be able to have some perspective on. It's so many people in our community, they want the language to be revitalized, but for themselves, they just feel like it's too daunting, it's too big, it's too much of a project. So how can we help them to take those smaller steps that we know will add up to bigger steps?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because it can be overwhelming, especially if you're working full time and have all of this. And I think for at least in our context, we realize people have different roles. Some people will devote like their life to this, like myself, and then others will be support, either by sending their grandkids, attending a weekly community class, or providing services or funding. And then everyone has a role to play. But also, I think just starting with bite-sized pieces, that every day you can take a bite and hang on to that, and then the next day wake up and add a little bit more, and breaking it down that way, it's much more approachable, so that within a month you would actually have quite a few common phrases if you were able to learn one phrase a day even. Those are the kind of things we like to do, especially for our parents who are not like full-time language learners, but we want them to be able to reinforce the language at the home, especially if their kids are in immersion. And so coming together at least once a week and having conversation practice, but also having like daily phrases. And we do encourage not so much noun based, but more action based, at least for our language. So you have a verb, like you're saying, "Kathla," eat it, or "wanle," wake up, or whatever those common phrases are. More nouns, you're just naming things. But I think once you get just a baseline grammar framework, you can start plugging in things really quickly. So there's kind of a threshold. If you can sit down and devote, say, a summer to language learning, you would be at that threshold to where, even though maybe from then on you're only spending 30 minutes a day, you're still building and growing over time. But it is a marathon, and to really become a speaker, it does take some years. However, for those who are in our intensive program, within 1 year you can be conversational. So it just depends on how much time they have, but I do think everyone can learn, and I think at any age you can still start learning. The best age is, young. We like to start pre-verbal in the womb, but any age you can still learn, and we always encourage people to start. And we even have some who are non-Yuchi learning because they're related or they're connected to the community and they want to support. So we also encourage that. But yeah, tell me more about your community situation there and the language efforts.
Yeah, sure. And we can have a longer conversation later because I don't want to take away from the other people asking questions. But, our biggest challenge is that we don't have any living speakers. And so, we have those of us who are studying from archives and, trying to now create materials for other people. So everybody's kind of starting as a beginner, and me as a beginner trying to teach other beginners. We're working on a children's language book that's going to be both a written book and an audio book because, as you said, like hearing the language is so important. And we're making up the orthography as we go. And yeah, so it's just about like how do we effectively bring it to to the community. So we're just kind of
Yeah,
on
that's
ways to do that.
exciting. Well, when we started, we did once a week because everyone was working full time. And then as it progresses, if you have funding to sponsor at least a core group who can really devote their whole day to it, that will really, I think, exponentially grow the efforts and the
Yeah.
outcomes. So, but yeah, I'm excited. Let's stay in touch on that for sure.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Sounds good. So
I think, Janet, you have your hand up. Do you want to unmute?
I'm enjoying this session immensely. I want to share with you, and I'm sure others will agree, when you mentioned that the number of elders that were victims of the COVID-19, my heart just bled. And I'm wondering if that could help you in gaining more funding on a national level, a federal level. I don't know, when you just say funding, there's all kinds of funding. And I was wondering, where do you see the best energy to put toward funding on a private level, local, state, or if we can get more federal dollars put into it, because it is almost like a genocide. That COVID-19 really went through your community severely. What do you feel about how to gain more funds?
That's a great question, and I really appreciate that. What we have seen, well, for us in the Yuchi community, as I mentioned, Yuchi is not federally recognized as a US tribe, other than Yuchis are enrolled as Creek, which is federally recognized. But this is a real obstacle for getting federal funding.
Labels.
Yeah, even though we have a unique language and we, have always had that, as well as ceremonial grounds and a thriving community. So that's very political, as you know, and a lot of injustice there. But for us, it's been the foundations and approaching either wealthy individuals who have started foundations like Warren Buffett's foundation. We do receive some funds, those kind of things. So we like to see it as liberating funds. So not all of our funding sources are like ideal, but we feel it's decolonizing those funds once they come into our community. And I really like what you're saying, and I think there is a lot of work to be done there. A lot of it takes time, and we as the people on the ground, we don't always have the time, but that's where other allies and partners and advocates can play a role in helping to pave those.
Well, there's definitely a COVID tie-in here of, and I think if that is used and the buzz were genocide, oh my, people have to sit up and listen.
Yeah, good point. That's a really good point. So I could definitely see that as a national movement there. Yeah, it's a really good point.
Praying for you. Because
Oh,
really, we're all in the same camp.
yeah.
And that's the issue that I'm preaching now, that we need to think about this.
Oh,
Yes, all in the same camp.
oh. Sanley kaya suta.
Other questions from anyone? Or thoughts, or would it be appropriate for me to say this? Senlei, would that be?
Yes,
Great.
Sanley, that's great.
Senlei, this was wonderful. I do have a prayer that I'd like to invite us all to pray together. We'll have resources. I see John Coleman is our communications director here in Eastern Pennsylvania, United Methodist Church conference. And so he will be helping us, I'm sure, with getting this video posted, and you could use it in your churches. You could start discussions. You could use it as a way to talk about becoming allies and advocating. And so keep an eye out for that and all kinds of resources, and to be able to go to the website and see some of these videos are on there that we saw little bits of. You just gave us little teasers.
Say something real quickly.
Yeah, yeah.
No great importance, but I visited Richard Grounds in his home about 15 years ago. Suan Ware Diaz, a Kiowa friend, we were working for General Commission on Religion and Race, and we were in Oklahoma for our board meeting. We went by to visit. It was an incredible experience, and he had some elder speakers come over and some children. I don't know, Haley, if you were there. It was like 15 years ago. But
Yes.
they spoke and they taught and they sang, and he was just an incredible person to meet. And I learned more about him. And in fact, I wrote an article for New World Outlook magazine, I think, about that visit and about the Yuchi language effort. And so, like I said, I didn't have really a good question, but I just did.
Oh, that's so neat to know. I would love to see that article. I was likely around. I don't know.
May
for
have been,
sure.
yeah.
I might have
Like,
been.
it was around 2007, I think. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I might have been in college, but I did end up serving on that General Commission on Religion and
I thought I
Race,
remember you did. Yeah.
a youth delegate. So
Yeah. Great.
yeah, it's so good. That's a nice connection.
Yeah, we had our board meeting in Oklahoma. We went to Suan's church, Kiowa Church, and went to a ceremony, and it was just a great experience for our board to be there. And I was glad to be able to travel with her prior to the board meeting, visit Harry Long and Richard and others in their homes. So yeah.
Oh yeah, Sanley, huh?
And I should say that Suan Ware Diaz sends her regards to you, Haley, and to all of us, actually. She wanted me to remember her to you and your dad. So
yes,
nice reminder, John. Thank you.
Very nice. Yeah, she's been a big force as well with our.
May I just ask, Carol, what language and community you're working with? I was just curious. Carol?
Corral?
Oh,
yeah.
sorry, me. Sorry, I was like, I'm sorry. I'm with the Nanacook community in Delaware.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, been there. Okay, great.
Great.
And I see Raggy's on too, right? So you've got a
Yes.
new project just starting.
Raggy's my partner in crime. Wonderful, amazing person.
I went to a powwow there some years ago. Yeah, and heard some Raggy and Bo and others, and the kids from the school too. Yeah.
So again, here's a local project that's getting started that we can be supporting as well. So we can support more than one project and be allies, right? In many ways. Yeah. And Raggy's on. I don't know if she can speak, but I didn't know there's something coming up, isn't there, Carell? A book that's you said you're working on the book. Is it being released now?
So we are the book is written. We are about 60, I'd say, % of the way with the audio recording, and we are sort of working on those final stages to get it printed and ready for distribution.
All right. And you're in the midst of raising funds for that.
Yes.
Right now. Yes. Okay. So we can put a plug in for that too. We need to, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. And maybe we can even put, I don't know, John, maybe we can put a link on with all this resources on there to that project as well. We'll talk.
Thank you. I will say I just came from a weekend retreat, a Black and Brown youth retreat of Black and Latino kids learning each other's culture and meeting each other, and they want to do it again. It would be incredible if we were able to add a Native element. I mean, I know the kids would come from Delaware, I guess, and New Jersey, but it would be wonderful to do that. But this was a first time event, so yeah.
Great, that's exciting.
Go ahead, Raggy. You got some youth, don't you?
Well, I was going to say part of the book is so exciting too, because we have one of our own travel people, Paige McNabb, and she's a young adult, and she is the artist, and the artwork is just unbelievable. Just looking at it sometimes, it's like you want to take it and begin to frame it just to remember all of the memories that you have. So we are so very excited, and it's fun to work with Carell and Keith, and learning the language is so important because the language has so much about the culture in it. And so we learn a lot, and I just get too excited when I talk about it. It's just too much. And Carell is a great teacher, and we all remember to take it slow, because some of the words are so very, very long, but she does really great at it.
Great. Thanks, Raggy. It's good to remember all this. And yeah. Okay. And Paige, yes, I was going to say, Paige is the one, some of you may remember when we did Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, and we recognized that Paige did some artwork around that campaign that's always continuing. So an incredible artist. And I don't know that I've shared that with you, Halay, but I will have to do that. And
Great. Yeah, that sounds good.
oh, is there someone else?
Sue-Ann, she did the artwork for Justice for Our Children, Healing for Our Communities.
Okay, so yes, that's right. She did that. So for the boarding school. So I was going to say, we had a special Facebook webpage set up for recognizing the genocide, the cultural genocide, and otherwise that happened at the boarding schools. And language was a big piece of that. So a number of folks on this call and in the conference have received that message and that education, but really that word genocide, it can't be taken too lightly, can it, with language? I mean, the culture and the language are so tied together. So this is a chance to reverse that horrible injustice.
Yeah, even my dad uses the word linguicide, which is language genocide. Linguicide is another way of getting at that.
So good. Any way that we can use English in order to decolonize, right?
Yes, we appreciate it.
All right. So if you would, this will be a litany prayer, folks. So if you want to unmute for the many part, I can lead us through. So let us pray. Creator God, we give thanks that you are a God of justice and love.
With humility, we are children, acknowledge the relationship of all living things. For this we thank you. We praise you and we worship you.
Great mystery, you have given us minds to know you. We receive all knowledge and understanding from you.
Open our hearts to all creation, to honor each other with honesty, courage, and respectfulness shown in the sacred teachings.
God of diversity, in tongues of fire, you blessed your disciples with the gift of different languages, that all people might know you and speak to you in words of praise.
Teach us
to love diversity as you do. Stoke fires that rekindle indigenous languages.
God who creates, who redeems, who makes holy, we thank you for the holy gift of language, and especially for the languages of the indigenous peoples of our church and our country.
We acknowledge with heavy hearts the loss of language imposed on Indigenous peoples and pray for the continuing work of recovering those languages, those mother tongues that speak from heart to heart.
God of wisdom, we pray for the many nations that have had their languages stolen, and particularly, we pray for the members of the Yuchi Nation.
We pray that these your people will be restored, grow and thrive with honor and glory through the Yuchi language and cultural gifts you have given to the Yuchi Nation as caretakers.
We lift up Halay and all the teachers.
Strengthen them and convict us to commit to support this work with gratitude to those who undertake it. Amen.
And once again. So I think could be a fair ending to our official program, but if you want to stick around, I'll keep the virtual door open. But thank you so much for joining us today, and for my friends on CoNAM for helping me as I work to put this together. So peace,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Thanks. Thank you.